You were so
Hello,
on point.
everybody.
It's
I'd
the
like to
bomb.
welcome you to the panel on preventing harassment and violence in
Oh
the
dear.
workplace. My name is Maria McClintock, and I'm your moderator today for this event. This panel is being hosted by the university's Workplace Violence and Harassment Prevention Working Group, and I'm pleased that the chair, Daryl Boyce, the AVP of Facilities Management, is on hand to say a few words before we get started.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you and welcome to this second session. I think the people that attended the first session felt that it was actually quite valuable, and I hope you feel the same way. And this is a very important programs. There are two programs actually that we're dealing with at this particular session, but they're very important. And although we're responding a lot, mostly we're responding for sure in terms of the policies and the programs to the provincial government's legislation, we see them as also a really solid improvement to our promotion of a safe and respectful workplace and community. So they're very instrumental in a number of other programs that we have in place or are developing to achieve those goals. Panel discussion that you're part of today is just one of the initiatives and programs that we're putting in place. We have the online training module that's available, and also both the policies and the programs are on our website. So we hope that you've had a chance or will have a chance to view those as well. Again, welcome and thank you for taking the time to be with us.
Thanks, Daryl. Daryl's reference to the website and the materials, that's on the Environmental Health and Safety website. Everything, including the pamphlets you received today and all the training materials, are located on that website. By way of housekeeping, a couple of things. On your way in, you should have received a couple of documents. One of them is the Respect and Safety pamphlet that provides you with some general information. There is also an evaluation form, and the organizers would appreciate it if you fill that out and hand it off to Louise Gardner there in the purple at the door. And if you don't have time to fill it out while you're here, Louise and the organizers would appreciate it if you pop it into the interoffice mail and address it to Louise in HR. Also, by way of housekeeping, today's panel and just the panel discussion will be videotaped, not the question and answer period to follow, for your information. But you could also tell your colleagues who could not make it today that they'll be able to see the panel discussion online. Again, this video will be housed on the EHS website. Each of our distinguished panelists will speak about 20 minutes, and then there will be time for question and answers. And without further delay, I would like to introduce, to my immediate right, Joy Noonan. Joy Noonan is a respected lawyer who practiced labor law close to 20 years. And in 2006, she shifted her practice to that of full-time neutral work. And she is currently a principal at Aptus Conflict Solutions. She has received the designation of Chartered Mediator from the Alternative Dispute Resolution Institute of Canada and mediates and arbitrates a variety of cases, including human rights issues, employment law, and labor and commercial matters. Today, Joy will be discussing some of the legal aspects of the newly amended Occupational Health and Safety Act. To Joy's right is Kay Roberts. For 20 years, Kay was a police officer with the Ottawa Police Service. And in 2005, she founded Awakening Wave organization Evolution. She is a WELL Systems certified code model coach. And using this model as a foundation, she has created the first of its kind educational experience that offers front-end prevention in an effort to eliminate issues of harassment and violence in the workplace. Kay specializes in areas of workplace harassment and violence prevention, diversity competency, team building, and nonviolent crisis intervention. Today, Kay will be discussing the key issues to developing a healthy respectful workplace, and the role we can all play in that. Beside Kay, to her right, is Mark Arnold. Mr. Arnold has a background in economics and social work. He is currently the director of the Employee Assistance Program and Business Development with Family Services Ottawa, and he is Carleton's EAP representative. Mark has years of experience working closely with large corporations and consulting with senior managers on a variety of employee and wellness issues. He has given more than 600 seminars and presentations on health-related issues to organizations across the province. Today, Mark will discuss services available to Carleton employees and various other issues that employees and the employer may face. Without further ado, I'd like Joy to come on up.
Thank you very much. And thank you everybody for coming. It's really nice to see a second terrific turnout for this kind of a seminar. So the goal, as you've heard, is for us to give you some value. So it's all about added value for us. And in preparing for something like this, the three of us brainstormed, I will look at this and try and give you my insight from the perspective of I'm a lawyer, I'm an arbitrator, I'm often a workplace investigator, so I'm the person you'll probably meet at the end of any process. And I'd like to talk to you about how we got to having this legislation in the first place and what it's there to do. We'll then go over to Kay, who's going to bring it into the workplace and really down to the personal with Mark, who's one of the support people that someone might go to see. So with that, let's look at what we've got on our hands here. What we're looking at today is the recent amendments to the Occupational Health and Safety Act. And now we have specific protections for workers from workplace violence and workplace harassment. But I think it's important, again, for all of you to appreciate that this is one piece of law that deals with what is not an unusual situation. I mean, we're at work for a great part of our lives. Workplaces are very complex, busy organisms. These issues have been coming up for decades. And so historically, these kinds of things are dealt with, for example, with the Human Rights Code, right? People would file a human rights complaint to say they've been discriminated against, maybe because of their religion, their race, if they're gay, any number of enumerated grounds. That's still there, okay? So that still exists. There's also the civil law. And I don't know if any of you follow any civil law at all, but of course I do, can't help it. And, not that long ago, we had a very big case called P.S. Vieira, and it went all the way to the Ontario Court of Appeal. And in that case, we had an employee who left the workplace and sued the employer and said she was harassed on the job. I'm, of course, very much simplifying the case. They're all very complicated. But in a nutshell, the facts there involved a manager who was very stressed out, a workplace that, would you like me to?
We're just going to lower this mic.
There. Okay, there has. Yes, I am a bit small. To remind me of my elfin status. So, all right, so P.S. Vieira, we have a stressed out workplace. It was Bell Canada. It was a big, busy marketing center. And in this situation, we had an employee who got in the face of a manager and a manager who gave a push. Now, that was a number of years ago. And what followed became a rather extraordinary lawsuit in which a huge damage award was rendered against Bell Canada for not just the act, okay, but the way that Bell had handled it, right, and how it was managed after it happened. So fascinating, right? So we have this other element. Now we also have the criminal code that's out there, and I think many of you will remember the West Ray mine disaster that happened a number of years ago. And after we had this disaster with a number of miners losing their lives, anyway, a nightmare. The criminal side of the bar stepped up and said, organizations need to be held accountable for the safety of people as well. We need to make it criminal, not just a social faux pas, not just a provincial legislation, but criminal. So Bill C-45 brought that to the fore. So what we now add on to that, and what's of crucial importance for all of us here today, is now our Ontario legislation, the Occupational Health and Safety Act, and it has been updated. And there are a couple of reasons that it needed to be, we'll say, given some juice or empowered, and people needed to be empowered through this legislation. So it deals with harassment in the workplace and violence in the workplace specifically. Now, the law deals with employers and employees, just so you're clear, that's the law. Your policies at Carleton go further. So the policy here at Carleton applies to students, it applies to visitors, volunteers, and contractors. So it's broad and it's robust. And it's something to be quite proud of, frankly. It's a very impressive policy. So as part of Carleton's obligation under the law, the managers, both academic and administrative, all need to complete the online training before the end of the month. Now, as somebody who's coming to talk to you, I say, okay, well, I don't want to come and tell them things they already know. You do have this terrific deck that's in the online training that I went through. All of the basics are there. It's all there for you. So don't miss it. It's a great opportunity, if nothing else. But I think what I can give to you is a sense of what it's there for. Why do we have it? So it's not just more red tape, and it's not just more of a hassle for you. It's actually a great tool for you. And the impetus for these changes are 3 or 4-fold. First of all, believe it or not, even though Ontario is a leading province in terms of developing law, we were behind on these sorts of policies. We were behind most of the other provinces in Canada. So it was time for that reason, if nothing else, to look at what our laws were they responsive? And the feds, of course, updated the Canada Labour Code. And once that happened, we really then, the momentum began to need to deal with things on a provincial level as well. We then had a very tragic incident here in Ottawa, which I'm sure all of you remember, involving OC Transpo. And it really brought it into this very vivid view of what needed to be dealt with in workplaces. So we have, a person, a killer in the end, but who himself, as Mark will speak to, was horribly bullied in the workplace, was himself a victim of terrible discrimination because he had a speech impediment. But because it went on for years, and we all know what happened, right? He came in and people died. So, sometimes it takes something very dramatic, right, to get people back to the table and say, okay, we know we need to put tools in the hands of employers and of managers, not just more responsibilities, but more tools to help them deal with these situations. We move on a little further in time, because again, it's all the talk stage. But then we have the very tragic case, and I don't know if any of you remember the story of Laurie Dupont. But Laurie Dupont was a nurse in Windsor. And she was murdered at work by a doctor who she'd had a relationship with, but it was over. And Laurie Dupont sought a restraining order against the doctor, but he contested it. And because of the way the court system works, and we all know how that is, it doesn't move quickly. So he contested it, so they had a date in December. She asked for the restraining order in April. The court gave them a date in December for a hearing. And between April and the events, Laurie told her employer on more than one occasion that she was afraid, that she was harassed, and she was frightened at work. And they met, and they talked about it at the hospital. They didn't quite know what to do. Do we fire this, do we fire the doctor? And you can just imagine, all of you, the discussion that would go on in those rooms. Well, what kind of evidence is there? Well, I don't know, what's the story? And I mean, oh my God, he's a doctor, he's gonna sue us for sure. At the end of it all, the hospital decided it didn't have enough evidence to act. So her hearing was in December, and he murdered her in November. So she never got there. And Kay will speak a little more about what happens in these situations. But after the DuPont incident, her murder, and the inquest that followed, a number of NDP MPs put forth a private member's bill. They said, you know what, in her spirit and for anyone else who's suffering like this, we are moving forward with this. So they pushed it. It didn't catch on, it didn't catch fire, but what happened was Bill 168 jumped onto it. And so Bill 168, which I'm sure you've all heard before, is now part of our law, and it's part of the Occupational Health and Safety Act. A couple of statistics that I thought you might find interesting. Did you know, Stats Canada, 17% of all incidents of violence in Canada, including physical assault, sexual assault, and robbery, happen at work. It's shocking, eh? 71% of these workplace incidents are classified as physical assaults, 24% as sexual assaults. There is an average, my friends, of 14 Canadian workplace homicides every year. which again, kind of shocked me. 46% of workplace violence incidents involve alcohol or drugs. Occupation fields at the highest risk for violence in the workplace are health and social services, accommodation and food services, and education. So you're in one of the higher risk areas. 19% of workplace violence incidents involve weapons like guns, knives, bottles, sticks, or bats. Workplace violence is reported to the police more often, 37%, than non-work violence, which is only reported as 17%. Very interesting that male victims of workplace violence are much more likely to report the incident to the police, 57%. Female victims, only 20%. And I give you that only to underscore why it's so important that there be these policies out there and that you be confident in the way you use them and be able to work with them, because clearly people do need support and often they're afraid to go further. If there's a support network here for them, they will go to it. So Carleton has created two very important policies. You have them right here in your handy little pamphlet, a little summary. But the two key policies that you'll often hear are the workplace violence policy, and you'll see right in here, there's a definition of what workplace violence is, all right? Workplace violence, I find as an arbitrator and as an investigator in many instances, something I can grasp. It's fairly straightforward to me. The one I find trickier and that I'll spend a little time talking about is the next one, which is workplace harassment. That's a little, it's a little more nebulous to deal with in terms of you really need to understand what's going on in that fact situation. Your pamphlet gives you that definition as well. If you want to understand a little more fully, though, what your responsibilities are, look at the web link, okay? Because the whole policy will set out your responsibilities as well. And so again, it's reassuring to just look at it and understand, okay, I've got something happening in my workplace. Have a look, see where it falls, see what you might want to do next. The other thing that's in the Act that I want to put on everyone's radar, and the reason that the Act, again, is so significant in terms of legislation, it's so evolved, is that it does something very brave, and it actually asks that domestic violence become a part of something that is on everybody's radar. And that, of course, is what got a lot of buzz going on about this legislation before it became law. And how this will all roll out will be for all of us to see and learn from, but it's there. So what it does is it requires employers to respond to domestic violence in a way it's never required before. You know, I myself, I can tell you, I come from PEI, and in high school, you know, the prettiest girl in high school that I remember was shot dead by an angry boyfriend at the car dealership down the road. And, you know, she had been asking for a restraining order against this guy for, you know, a year. But he just walked in and shot her dead. And, you know, even now at 47, I look back and I can't believe that really happened. But it does happen. And employers now, because of the new legislation, if you an employer becomes aware or ought reasonably to be aware, in other words, turning a blind eye is no longer okay. So if they think domestic violence could likely expose a worker to physical injury, that it might happen in the workplace, an employer should take every precaution reasonable in the circumstances to protect that worker. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. So employers have a duty to act. What's interesting as well is an employer now also has a duty to provide information to other workers, okay? Significant that if personal information related to a risk of workplace violence, okay, if the worker can be expected to encounter the person in the workplace, if there's a risk being presented to any of the other employees, they have a right to know that there's something. Now, in our last session, we had a very good question about how exactly do you go about dealing with that kind of information. And because it was such a good question, I will touch on it. That, you know, if you do become aware that there's a situation, that there's a risk, and as you do your training, you're going to do a risk assessment. So, you know, you will have been through this. But in terms of how you deal with conveying that information to anyone else, please be very careful. Because the last thing anybody wants to see is for you to become caught in the middle of somebody threatening that you've destroyed their career, right? Or you've ruined their life, or you've exposed personal information. So, the law is very tight, and it says, you're to share as much as you think you absolutely must, but nothing more. My advice is, if you're in this situation, if ever this comes up, this is the time to go. And if you think you have to make an action here, talk to HR, okay? And script exactly what information you're going to share so that at least you have that reassurance that what you've shared is the appropriate piece, all right? So there's a duty to warn as well now. I'd like to stop, though, and talk for a couple of minutes with you about the other piece of this that in your daily life you're probably going to encounter the most, and that is this notion of workplace harassment. And I speak to this from a number of fronts, but mostly as an arbitrator and often as somebody who gets asked to come in and investigate these situations. And I was saying to my colleagues last panel that in 2008, when I started being asked to do these neutral investigations, I did 3. And in 2009, I did 10. And in 2010, I did 18. So what on earth is going on, I say to myself. Interestingly, in 2011, I've only done 3 so far, and all 3 have involved very serious workplace action. And my theory on this is that people are becoming much more comfortable and confident in what workplace harassment is, and perhaps even more importantly, everybody, what it isn't. And so rather than trying to bring issues that, listen, there's conflict everywhere. That life is full of conflict. It doesn't mean it's harassment. Because someone is feeling harassed does not mean they should file a harassment complaint. And yet, this is a bit of the knee-jerk response to what happened when this legislation first came into force. People are like, oh my God, I'm totally harassed. I'm filing a complaint without really, and of course, employers on the receiving end, oh my God, it's a harassment complaint. We have to do an investigation. All right, hold on, everyone. And so what's happened is over the course of the last couple of years, which is to be expected, right? People have become more comfortable with what is and what isn't workplace harassment. And I wanted to take the time on the front end to give you the sense of what the legislative changes were to help you understand that they were made to address very serious situations. Serious conflict, serious consequences. And so when you think about how we fold the workplace harassment piece into that, it does have a natural fitting place. And often workplace violence is preceded by often years of workplace harassment, right? So these are things that work together. Workplace harassment policies are there to address very serious behavior with serious consequences. So I think in 2011, we see things settling back down into I'm going to say a more intelligent approach to these issues. Often when people will approach me now, I would say I still deal with as much of that kind of conflict, but often that kind of conflict, before it becomes harassment, it can be mediated, it can be facilitated. You can sit these people down and you can have a good discussion about what's going on, intention, impact, all of those great mediation things. Once an investigation is underway, though, that train is out of the station. And, people, I think, historically, in the last couple of years, haven't thought through sufficiently what that means and what the end result will be. What do you think is going to happen here? So, always a good investigator will take that time with you at the front end and ask you those questions. What is the goal? What is going to happen here? Harassment, workplace harassment, involves 3 crucial pieces, all right? It's usually a course of conduct. So, and by that I mean it's a pattern, right? It's usually not one event. Now, of course, I have to give you the proviso there. Every once in a while, there's one just spectacular event that puts you right over the threshold. But normally, what you're looking for in your workplace is something you see happening like a pattern, right? This is behavior that's repeating itself. Usually it gets a little worse as time goes on. The second key piece is that it's unwelcome. And the best example I have of that one, and it's one, again, I use it because it's just so commonplace, is the telling of dirty jokes at work, all right? Happens all the time. My God, I'm a labor lawyer, right? lots of talk about sex at work. And you know what? If there's a group of 3 people and they all get a big kick out of talking about sex at work, so talk away. Nobody's upset, nobody's offended. However, what will usually happen in those scenarios is there might be 2 or 3 people over here having a great yuck about someone's sex life, and a person sitting right over here, who's maybe not even part of the joke, is deeply offended, or even mildly irritated is enough for me, frankly. But, all it takes is for somebody to not be okay. And the moment somebody articulates, I'm not okay with that, it's unwelcome, guys. It's unwelcome. And again, Kay will speak to that in a little more detail. The one I want to focus on with you, though, and which is the engine of harassment, is the conduct has to be vexatious. And often it isn't. And I think it's important to understand that just having somebody say, well, I didn't mean for them to be off on stress leave for 6 months. Well, I didn't mean to hurt them so badly. Well, I didn't intend for all of this to happen. Okay, so it wasn't vexatious on my part. It's not quite so simple. If the conduct is such, when you're looking into this, that it exceeds what a reasonable person, right, would consider appropriate in the workplace, it's vexatious, all right? So put another way, there doesn't have to have been a subjective intent on my part to have hurt you, okay? If a reasonable person, another way we put it in the law talk is you knew or ought to have known, right? If a reasonable person would think that that behavior is not appropriate, guess what? It's vexatious. So those are the 3 real keys, the last one being the engine of how that whole sort of piece in the legislation is meant to work. There's no requirement in the Occupational Health and Safety Act that your personal harassment involve any grounds under the Human Rights Code, just so we're clear. That's still there, but this is something else, and this is broad. It has nothing to do with sex, religion, anything. The definition of harassment has also now been looked at. We have the benefit of some really good arbitration decisions where there have been grievances, they've been heard. And one that's important is a case you'll hear about a lot called Ryan versus Treasury Board of Canada. I'm just going to read you this one piece. It says, this is the arbitrator. Harassment should not be founded upon non-consequential incidents, non-culpable errors of judgment, or foolish behavior. Neither, in my view, should it be employed as a weapon in the workplace, especially where such use is furthering personal vendettas. And I pause there because I've certainly been pulled into a few of those. Okay? So that's not what it's there for. The proper function of the law of harassment and harassment policies in the workplace is not to cause problems or to exacerbate interpersonal disputes, but to protect those in need of protection. And if you think about that for a minute, of course, it makes perfect sense and fits in with the other piece, right, of Bill 168. Behaviors inherent in your workplace, such as interpersonal disputes, we just don't get along. It's a problem, but it's not harassment. Work-related stress, momentary outbursts. Who among us have not had a moment? Provided the moment is not too spectacular, you're allowed a moment. All right? We're all allowed a moment, and God knows we all have them. As I said, it's not necessary for me to mean to hurt you. And while a single incident is usually not enough, if it's, as I say, if it's a really good one, it could put you over. What really matters here in all of this is the impact that the actions have on other people. And it usually does tend to flow from, and Mark will speak to this, where you meet people, and this has been going on, you'll often find for years, right? 20 years, 3 years, but a long time. Exercising, and this is an important one as well, exercising management rights in a normal way is not harassment. I say that as an arbitrator. So telling employees that they really do need to perform their job, it is irritating for them at times, I know. And sometimes we feel harassed. But that is not harassment per se. Now, the way, of course, the way these things are conveyed is another issue. But performance management, absenteeism, interpersonal conflict, trying to manage that with staff. This is generally not what the harassment policies are there for. There's lots of issues in workplaces that involve disrespect and disrespectful treatment of each other, and it's all unacceptable. I'm not suggesting that's okay behavior, it's not. But I want you to be clear on what this is. And this is about serious behavior that has serious consequences. I see an awful lot of complaints in my job as an investigator and as a mediator where people are filing harassment complaints because they really just think, for lack of a better word, that their manager is really crappy. And they will file a complaint that that manager is asking them to do things that are just ridiculous. They're in their job description, but ridiculous nevertheless. Again, we have to be careful with a tool like this because it can be used in a very vicious way. And part of all of our collective responsibilities is to ensure that it's not. Because the moment it starts getting abused, it's not doing its job for the people it's there for, right? So, all of that to say, it's really important that you think very carefully. If you think you may be observing or yourself be involved in a situation that is a pattern of workplace-related harassment, you need to seek out support. It is crucial that you do that, all right? I mean, I said this last time as well, but this is your career. It is the most valuable investment you'll make. And whether you think you may be on the receiving end of this as a respondent, or you think you may need to file a complaint yourself, or you've become aware of something going on around you, all right, this is why you're so blessed to be in a situation where you actually have resources to go to. Lots of people don't. So use them. And if ever there was a time, it's when you're in these unusual situations where, your yellow alert will be up. You might not be on red alert yet, but the yellow is up. Okay, so get some advice. I think it's equally important, and I'll just say in closing, equally important that respondents, if somebody complains about you, it's crucial that you get support as well. And people forget that piece. Complainants, the system works to protect, as it should, don't misunderstand me. But respondents also need support because often they are every bit as devastated in the situation as a complainant is. And so whether that be a support that begins internally, whether it's the first time in someone's life that they actually talk to an outside lawyer and get some guidance, I think it's worth your investment. So I'll turn it over to Kay now. Thank you.
Thank you, Joy. Kay, would you like to come up?
Absolutely. Thank you. All right, I'll say a few opening remarks so we can get the sound going this morning. We had some issues. Clearly, I was able to project, but the mic wasn't doing its thing, so I'm starting to hear myself a little bit amplified, so I think we're good to go. It's really wonderful to be here, and as I shared with the folks this morning, I think it's a real privilege to be able to stand before you and share the information and considerations that I'm going to with you for the next 20 minutes or so. Promise to try to be within that 20-minute time frame. And I also think it's great that you've taken time out of your busy days to be here to experience this panel. I think that it is a very significant start point for clearly what Carleton University sees as an important issue to ensure that your workplace, you're experiencing your workplace as healthy and safe and certainly welcoming. So you're going to hear me refer to some of the things that Joy spoke to, and while I'm thinking about it, I'm going to just run over and grab my glasses. We discovered this morning that clearly I need them. I'm going to be referring to some of the cases that Joy spoke to, but I'm going to be speaking in the context of, if I can use this language, our human beingness. And it's going to be a great segue for Mark when he talks about the impact. But it really is time for us to have the conversation at the level of our human beingness, and what I like to call or express the notion that we're all human beings being human in our workplace. So what I want to do is I want to start out by referring to the case, the Laurie DuPont case that Joy alluded to this morning. That was, again, in November 12th, 2005, Laurie DuPont was killed in her workplace. What's really important to note about this was the coroner's inquest. Dr. Peter Jaffe testified at the coroner's inquest. And what we came to learn from his testimony was that between the police, the employer, and family, there were 84 opportunities to intervene before Laurie DuPont was killed. 44 of those opportunities were with the employer. So that's a very significant statistic if you think about all of the opportunities that we had to prevent Laurie DuPont's murder. And what we can't really have an appreciation for in those moments is when we look back is all the times and why we did not. But the reality is there's something going on at the level of our human beingness that prohibits that. And that's for us ourselves to explore. The other case I want to refer to, which happened previous to the Laurie DuPont, was a case of an employee, Teresa Vince, who worked with Sears Canada, and I believe it was in the Chatham area. And Teresa Vince had filed a complaint in 1996 against her boss. She worked in the HR department, a complaint of sexual harassment. After having filed the complaint, Teresa Vince's boss advised her that on one particular evening she would have to work late with him, and he proceeded to kill her, shoot her, and then shoot himself in their workplace. And of course we have the OC Transpo incident, which clearly was devastating for the city and devastating for OC Transpo. What I want to bring to your attention in all three of those cases, and it really speaks to the idea, this notion that harassment will often precede a violent outburst or a violent incident in the workplace. In all three of these cases, there was a report of harassment having taken place first. So it really is critical. It's not to say that we don't need to be looking at violence as an important issue. And what happens with violence is, especially when you look at the definitions, if you've not had the opportunity to go to the policy to read that, it's fairly obvious when we're looking at an incident of violence in the workplace based on those definitions. Harassment, not as easy to encapsulate, if you will. And here's one of the reasons why. If you think about harassment, violence, and respect, just stated that simply, they're all nominalizations. You cannot put a pound of harassment in the trunk of your car. So if I were to reach over and say, there's harassment, excellent. Now I'll just put that there and we're done. Excellent. That's not the way it works. So we're all going to have, based on our internal experience of the external event, we're all going to have a different experience of the same external event. So it's really important to be able to make that consideration. What your policy and vis-a-vis your program has done is it has identified, both in terms of that policy and also reflecting the definitions as per the Occupational Health and Safety Act, what constitutes harassment and what doesn't constitute harassment, what constitutes violence and what doesn't constitute violence. So this is the premise upon which your program was built. There has to be a start point. That's not to preclude anyone from coming forward. It's not like I'm going to look at the policy and, it doesn't fit. If something's not feeling right, there's nothing that precludes you from going to your manager or going to your immediate supervisor and having the conversation. But we do have to create some parameters, bearing in mind that everybody's experience is going to be a little bit different. So with respect to your programs, of course, you have the program, and then out of the program follows your policy. Your program I like to look at, and having looked at it extensively, your program is the how and your policy is the what. This is the what about Bill 168, and your program actually talks about the how in terms of the investigative processes, the reporting process, the complaint process, what the roles and responsibility describes that extensively. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that because I know that it's all available to you, and I also know that by the end of this month, at the end of this month, you all will have experienced the online information education / training PowerPoint presentation. So it's all there for you. But I do want to bring a couple of things to your attention because it feeds into the basic principles of creating a respectful workplace that I'm going to share with you in a few minutes. So the first is that clearly your policy has recognized that there's a shared responsibility to create a harassment and violence-free workplace, including anyone that's witnessing such conduct, to bring that to the attention of their respective managers. It also lays out specific expectations with respect to managers, and it defines managers in your policy. And it goes on to say that managers include persons responsible, so just identify if you can identify yourself in this, persons responsible for a work unit who has ability to review behavior and initiate corrective action, including discipline. So if you already hold that as part of your responsibilities, you're considered to be the manager. I think this is critical. First of all, in the effort to prevent, minimize incidents of workplace harassment and violence, knowing what your role is critical. Taking all complaints seriously, including those ones that may not fall under the definition. We still have to take some action because somebody is having an experience in the workplace that is not certainly conducive to their well-being. You may not be required to determine whether or not the incident is founded, but as managers, you're required to respond to it, both in terms of your policy and certainly in terms of Bill 168 vis-a-vis the Occupational Health and Safety Act. We speak very quickly to your policies and procedures. It identifies things like the scope, so who's affected, who's impacted, definitions, roles and responsibilities at a very high level, complaint response and investigative processes, and corrective and/or disciplinary action. Your policy expressly states the roles that specific offices vis-a-vis your HR office, managers will have to undertake. And this is critical as well because it provides that objective lens. We were saying earlier this morning, there was a question that came from the floor, and blame us, right? So blame us, blame the policy, but there's a requirement for you to take some action. And the policy explicitly states how that's going to unfold in terms of the process, in terms of those timelines. So if you need to, when you are responding to an incident of workplace violence or harassment, feel free to blame us in terms of what you're required to do. It's the objectivity piece. In a forum where there's a lot of subjectivity going on. Why? Because we're all human beings being human in the workplace. It's not like our emotions get stopped at the door, right? There are things that are going on for us when somebody comes and says, X is happening to me. What if I've been accused of the same X that's happening to them? What's going on inside of me? Or what if X has happened to me? How am I going to respond? So we're all having that kind of experience. So it's critical that the process be objective. A couple of hints for success, and I think that, again, Carleton University is well on their way to this, certainly with respect to this panel discussion and however it chooses to follow through with training. But training is a very significant piece. Bill 168 is an interesting piece of legislation, and it has compelled employers in the province of Ontario to do something, and specific things. So there is a requirement to be compliant with this bill. The other thing that it's done is it's created a very, very huge opportunity for organizations, institutions such as Carleton University to implement a training program that actually does speak to the human beingness. After all of the policies have spoken, it speaks to our human beingness, because our reality is that's what we're being in our workplace. What I want to do, so that's about the extent to which I'm going to speak to your policy, because as I said, it's in there. It's available to you and accessible to you. What I want to do is I want to lend a couple of considerations for you in terms of how you know your workplace is a respectful one. So as I read these considerations out to you, I want you to, if you can settle into your own self, I want you to consider whether or not these notions of your respectful workplace are what you experience in your workplace. So it starts out, the statement starts out with, I know my workplace is respectful because each person, including myself, feels welcome when they step into the workplace, feels relaxed and stress-free in our requirement to desire to interact with their colleagues, feels comfortable in offering our thoughts, inputs, and ideas on matters without the fear of being ridiculed, humiliated, or demeaned in the process. No matter what our function is in the workplace, we know we will be treated respectfully and with dignity by our coworkers, and that we will have a sense of belonging in our workplace. We feel supported in our environment on a professional and on a personal level, and is recognized and acknowledged for the value we bring to the workplace, both as a person and as a matter of our function. So when you consider those, without it being a rhetorical question, when you consider that, is that your respectful work? Do you experience your workplace as respectful? Okay. With respect to contributing positively to your workplace in a respectful manner, some considerations to bring to bear with respect to faculty, staff members, managers, is that none of us walks through the workplace door with a desire to be disrespected. In fact, instinctually, we all want that. None of us wanted to be the last person picked on the team, right? That had some connotations to it. We all have a desire to be respected, acknowledged, and validated. To treat others as they would like to be treated. So I'm going to share just a couple of concepts with you around that, because typically what we're used to is treat others as I would like to be treated. But the reality is I might like to be treated one way, and you might like to be treated a very different way. So it is about treating others as they would like to be treated. And guess what that requires? You may have to inquire with them. It may well be that you have to have a conversation, and now starts the theme of the rest of my piece, and that is conversation, communication, have the conversation with each other, right? To treat colleagues and coworkers as the adults and professionals that they are. That everyone's function is critical to the overall operation of the institution, and that the extent of respect afforded should not be dictated by the variance in income and or job function. So when I walked in here this morning, although the staff was a little sparse because I was early, I was coming in from Almont, right? So that's an early departure. But still, I saw people here that were working, and some of them were in terms of how I experienced them. Some of them were in different roles. But the reality was, I don't think that any of them were here with a desire to be disrespected. To extend courtesies and considerations for the time and effort that colleagues and coworkers put into assisting you. And I would take that a step further and say that to extend courtesies. Hi, how are you today? I just finished some work with a small organization here in the city of Ottawa, and one of the very significant issues for people in this workshop was a team building workshop, was when they come into work and they say hi to someone or good morning to someone, and nothing is said back. So they're completely on ignore. It's a very, very tiny thing, but it's significant and has an accumulative effect. And the first thing we do is we start asking ourselves, what did I do? What did I say? What's wrong with me? What's wrong with them? And therein lies that unresourceful conversation, and in many cases, the water cooler conversation. To be hard on the problem and soft on the people. It speaks for itself. We're not responsible for liking everyone, but we are responsible for being respectful. That's the given. To be open and receptive to the ideas and perspectives of others, because we're all going to have different perspectives. That's our reality. We all come from different places. By virtue of our human beingness, we all bring a unique and diverse perspective to the workplace. We may not agree, and that is not permission to harass, demean, humiliate, or violate. So again, we may have differences of perspectives. In fact, I would put to you that you're all here in the same room, and I'm saying the same words to all of you, and you're all having your own individual experience of what I'm saying, because all meaning is context dependent. So depending on what the context is for you being here, what the context was for you getting here, whether or not you want to be here, whether or not you were forced to be here, whether or not you've had your own experience of harassment or disrespectful behavior in the workplace, you're all hearing based on your internal experience or your internal reference point. Teamwork is the cornerstone of a healthy, safe, productive, and enjoyable workplace. And the last thing I would say in terms of contributing positively to your respectful workplace is read your policy. So I was having a conversation after this morning's session, and there was a couple of questions that came up that clearly were with respect to the policy. If you have not already, I would encourage you to read your policy, know what is in there. If a question comes up to you, and certainly I don't want to deny anyone their questions after we finish speaking today. If you have a policy question, please do ask it. But keep in mind that once that question pops up for you, that is the moment that you want to go back to the policy, because your retention of what it is your policy can do for you and how it speaks for you is going to remain with you, because you're actually basing it on something, an inquiry that you have, as opposed to reading through the policy for the sake of reading through it. And before I get to the 9 basic principles of a respectful workplace, I want to talk about having open, clear, honest, direct communication with each other. It really is the start point for a cohesive work environment. So in that conversation, determine how to best resolve impending or actual conflict. Encourage facilitated discussion. So certainly in all of the places that I've done this work, we've got the City of Ottawa, we've got Calgary Police Service, Ottawa Police Service. One of the things that we're encouraging, and that all policies are encouraging, is have the conversation with each other. If you have an issue with someone, have the conversation with them. Let them know what we're discovering, and as Joy alluded to, there are some cases that clearly are harassment and there's severe stuff going on. For the most part, there's a start point for that, and it's not so severe. So have the conversation, let someone know. So I come up to you and I say, I got to let you know, when you said X, this is how it felt for me. This is how I felt when that happened. If I'm not having the conversation with you, the reality is I'm having the conversation with someone else about you. There is lots of validation in that, but there is no resolution there. And I have to start to get curious why I would have a conversation with someone else about you. That's something about me. That's not about them. So the conversation it's as simple as, I need to let you know, because if I'm not having the conversation with you, I'm having it over here at the water cooler. There's no resolution there. That takes courage. Clearly takes courage, but here's something else I'll share with you. I would suggest to you that it takes that much courage, if not more, for the person who I have just said we had this conversation, this is how it felt for me. Takes that much more courage for the person to stay in that tough conversation. And it's as simple as, tell me more. 3 words. 3 words will get you what we probably haven't had the opportunity to have in terms of, I'm not really sure I want to have the conversation. What's going to happen? What will happen to my career? Oh, I know this has happened to Betty over here, and that wasn't good. So, right, have the conversation. We're encouraging you to have the conversation, because if I'm not having it with you, you can be guaranteed I'm having it about you. And there is a certain validity to that, but then what happens is it actually escalates. And we get into, oh, you'll never believe, right? And then I get the validation here, and I go over here, you'll never believe. Oh, and I talked to Joe over here, and he couldn't believe it either, right? Lots of validation in that, no resolution. It's critical. Have the conversations with each other. People want to know. Because in many, many cases, based on their individual beliefs, values, attitudes, they're not even aware that they may have offended. Take action when undesirable behavior is being directed at you or towards another. This is another biggie. This is really going to call on the degree to which you're comfortable, confident, and competent. Choose to address these issues directly. And what is not lost on me is, depending on what your current internal state is around your ability, willingness, desire, confidence, competence to do that, no matter what your policy asks you to do, you may be stymied in your tracks by yourself, by virtue of whether or not you feel comfortable doing that. So when all of those things are not present, courage or competency, confidence, comfort, call upon courage, because that's what it's going to take. It is going to take us calling upon our courage, and we all possess that. Diversity equates to human beings having an expectation, in one context, human beings having an expectation of being respected, not just for the diversity, but for their human beingness. We all want that. I cannot stress that enough. Acknowledge and take responsibility for less than resourceful contributions to an interaction that you may have made. So I'm going to share with you a really quick story that happened for me when I was doing, if you can believe this, Respect Matters training, respectful workplace training with the Calgary Police Department. So we were doing training for all of their executives, so sergeants right through to the level of the chief. And on this one particular day, we have a group of 25 to 28 people, and a fellow walks in a little bit late. And the fellow that walks in a little bit late has a seeing eye dog with him. So Bob comes in the room, we welcome him, and he sits down, and we reconvene. And at some point, about halfway through the presentation, in all of my infinite wisdom, I created too many bullets on one of my PowerPoint slides. So this is what I said, and this is what I had said as a script in many of my presentations previous to that is, I know you all can read, so I'm not going to read the whole slide. Yes, I can hear it. It's happening in the room, right? You're already aware. I was oblivious to it. My internal state, I had a complete unawareness of what I had just said and that I had impacted Bob, because guess what? Bob missed out on that piece of information. I spoke to it, but I didn't actually I didn't actually read out what was on the slide by virtue of too many bullet items, right? So we finished the presentation. You kind of feel a little upbeat, right? Things are going well, really receptive. People were responding, right? Participating. Participation's great. And so after we saying hi and bye to different people, and then Bob comes up to me. How you doing, Bob? Good, good. He says, but I got to let you know, I really felt discriminated against. So as a Respect Matters facilitator, who's been hired to do 3 weeks of training, right? I'm thinking, well, okay. So guess what? Tell me more, Bob. And really tell me more, because if that's what I've done, then I need to know so that that doesn't happen again. So he told me. So this was my first experience of saying that, clearly oblivious to the fact that somebody was not going to be able to experience that part of the presentation. So I can guarantee you now, with that new internal reference point, I'm cognizant of that. I'm cognizant of when we need to be providing different options for people with different challenges. Prior to that, it just happened to be my experience wasn't that. So there is a point in time, so that tell me more conversation, there is a point in time where we do have to take the breath and then say, tell me more. It's not about you being good, bad, right, or wrong. It is about how do we move forward? How do we evolve from this? Because none of us has a desire to be disrespected in the workplace. So moving towards resolution as opposed to more conflict. And I'm sure that Joy can speak to this, but it's really important for us to get clear with ourselves what we're looking for. Am I looking for resolution here, or am I looking for conflict? As a workplace discrimination harassment advisor with Ottawa Police Service for 10 years, that was something that I was gauging for, if you will, when people would come forward. Because more conflict will certainly get you more conflict. The resolution really is the path to be taken, because you have to show up every day in the workplace. And again, using the concept of I statements, it's very, very hard to challenge somebody's truth of the matter. So even though you may have said X that you didn't mean to offend, my truth of it was in that moment that I was offended. So that I'm letting you know that. So it's not, again, about, having to run away scared that there's going to be this huge complaint. But the reality is we have to deal with it in that moment, and there's the opportunity as somebody has the conversation. So I'm gonna end off with what I'll call my 9 basic principles for a respectful workplace. Because no matter the beliefs, values, attitudes that we carry as individual human living systems, these principles will apply to all situations. And I would share with you that the success of your program really does depend on the extent to which you as individuals are actively, consistently participating in the Intention for a Respectful Workplace program. And really, our lives, I would suggest, depend on it. Because people die a lot of different ways in the workplace. It's not about not breathing. People die a lot of different ways, and I know that Mark will be alluding to that, so I won't carry on with that. So the first basic principle, focus on the behavior, not on the person. This ensures the objective lens is used when faced with what feels like a daunting task of dealing with a respectful workplace matter. Whether somebody's come to you, and we were just having a conversation at lunch, like, oh, wow, I've offended, right? Bob and I having that, oh, I've offended. But stay in the tough conversation. Stay in what might feel like a difficult conversation. It will be worth it. Being self-aware. Our perspectives will differ because they're being fed by our individually held belief systems. They're showing up in every interaction that we're having. Had we noticed that? So we can't always know what the other person's point of view is, but as we would want them to with ours, it is important to respect that they have a perspective, and it may well be different than ours. If we have a pulse, so far I'm thinking we all do, if we have a pulse, we will all have different positions and points of view, and to varying degrees, all meaning is context dependent. Basic principle number 3, a respectful workplace is made up of a collective of people choosing first as individuals to be respectful of and with themselves and others in the workplace. I cannot give to you what I have not already given to myself. So when I am being disrespectful or engaging in undesirable behavior or conduct, I really have to start looking here as opposed to making it about anyone else that I might be treating in that way. So that's our reality in terms of if I don't respect myself, the likelihood is that's going to be imposed on other people in a way that's not necessarily desirable in the workplace. Create an environment that is safe and inviting for expressing ideas. Remember that the perception of one's workplace is critical in their opting to express themselves, their ideas, and concerns. If one perceives they're interactive, so that's the interactions with each other, their work, that environment as dangerous, they are less likely to contribute, and when they do contribute, it may not necessarily be in a positive manner. All we need to do is look at the OC Transpo incident. The work environment should be one that is absent. So again, I want you to check in with yourselves as I say this. The work environment should be one that is absent of fear, ridicule, humiliation, or demeaning behavior relative to feeling safe in expressing and sharing your ideas in the workplace. Where people feel comfortable and confident being their authentic selves, expressing an inviting environment is created, and people will be more willing to take risks in the context of sharing their ideas and perspectives. Maintain a genuinely supportive environment. Human beings, you and I, we can calibrate for genuineness. We can calibrate for authenticity. So I'm going to share with you my experience of coming in here a couple of weeks ago and having conversations with Linda, Maria, Lise, and Daryl about your harassment and violence prevention policy and program. That's genuine and that's authentic. There is a desire to have everyone engage in their workplace here and feel safe and respected here. That's a great start point. Now I look out at you and know for sure that that happens with certainty when you choose to engage in that respectful workplace, respectful behavior with each other. No matter what the dynamics might be, because we can't all like each other all of the time, right? We're all leaders in the initiative to make things better. The notion of rank and position in office being where we look to take our cue for a respectful workplace or not is a very significant misnomer. I would suggest to you that you are all leaders in the context of creating the respectful workplace that you want to work and be in. We all must see ourselves as leaders in the effort to create that sustained environment. There is no other place for it to start than with the individual. And I say this in all of my presentations. Do not look at me for your workplace to be respectful. Look here. I say self-reflecting our way back to a respectful workplace because that's really what it is all about. So in some cases, it's about admitting to errors. Other cases, being open and receptive to others who are bringing that to your attention. People holding rank and position, office that genuinely move through their work environment, espousing to this, are great models. However, the days of choosing to be respectful or not, based on whether those above us are being that, is no longer an option, nor should it be. So it really is to bring home the message to all of us that my behavior and my conduct is going to dictate the extent to which my workplace is a respectful one. With respect to your work areas, be prepared on a daily basis to assess your own area and where opportunities present, implement improvements, where there's an ongoing monitoring, that where something detracts or adds from. So I shared a story this morning, and certainly in my policing background, there's a story I can share with you with respect to a tactical unit. It was on a very serious call. Everything ended wonderfully, but on the way back from the call, there was some, what we like to call in the policing world, dark humor. So there was some conversation going on in the bus on the way back to the station. And it got a little bit dark and a little bit darker and then a little bit darker until somebody stood up and said, okay guys, I think we've taken this far enough. So in that moment, it just simply stopped. Nobody needed to be offended. Nobody needed to be singled out. And in this particular case, because in the policing world, rank does have not necessarily its privileges, but there is impact as a result of rank. This was not a person that had rank that said this, but they clearly knew within themselves that it had gone far enough, and when it was put out there, then it stopped. So again, that lends to the notion of what Joy was talking about in terms of, yeah, we can have that conversation about, with sexual connotations attached to it. And so whether it's a third party over here that's taken aback by the conversation, or suddenly in the workplace, suddenly it's gone far enough and I say, you know what, before this was okay and I don't think it's okay anymore. That's the trigger. That's when we know. That's when it needs to stop. We have an impact on each other's lives, and I don't think anything that I've shared with you thus far as I come to my conclusion, I don't think anything that I've shared with you is a surprise for you or wasn't something that was rumbling inside of you. But I will reiterate, we have an impact on each other's lives. That's the given. How we choose to engage with each other directly impacts others. It's important to be mindful of how I am treating another person if I would want to be treated that way. When it is we have chosen to be disrespectful of another in the spirit of self-reflection. We have to get curious about ourselves, about how we came about giving ourselves permission to be that way. What we may discover is that it had a lot more to do with ourselves and our internal state at the time than what it had to do with the other. And I don't say this because I know all of you. I say this because I know me. And it's never, ever about the thing itself. when I was willing to go back in here, the start point for whatever was going on out here, whether I was saying something disrespectful or whether I was experiencing disrespectful behavior, I had to get curious about myself so that when we got into that resourceful or that resolution process, I was resourceful. And last but not least, intersecting lives. Our personal and professional lives intersect. What I experience in the work environment, I bring home, and vice versa. And this at an emotional level. We do not know what another person is dealing with in their lives. And it is not for us to create strife for them when a simple, what I will suggest, a simple breath and choosing to be respectful in spite of the differences we may hold would have sufficed. No matter how dissimilar the perspectives are, sometimes it is about respecting each other in our agreement to disagree. Treat others as they wish to be treated. And I will conclude with this. Your life is your time. It shouldn't hurt to go to work. I want to thank you.
Thank you very much, Kay. Up next is Mark Arnold.
Oh, sure. Okay. What I'm going to speak to today as the director for your EAP program is a couple things. I'm going to remind you, of course, about some of the tools available to you and your family. But I'm also going to bring this down to the personal level. We work with hundreds and hundreds of people every year, and a number of those people have faced very, very serious incidents of harassment. Is this on? Yeah. Yep. Oh no. I turned it off to go to the washroom, I guess.
And thank you for that.
It was on, now it won't turn off.
Okay, I'll just put you on.
We'll use this, yeah. Where was I? Okay. So we have a number of services available, including counseling services for people to access very quickly programs for any number of issues. Over the last 10 years, we've had about 17,000, 18,000 files opened, of which 110 were determined to be harassment. And by what I mean by determined, it was at the point of closure where a counselor closes the case and determines what was the primary issue or concern that was harassment. Now, that may not sound like a lot over 10 years, 110. But what I'm going to speak to today is the impact for those 110, because coincidentally, we work in a community agency. Our EAP program is part of a broader community agency, and one of its bigger programs is our anti-violence program, which we've had up and running since the 1970s. Some of the same indicators, some of the same behavioral, physical, and emotional indicators that we see with victims of violence in domestic situations, we see with those that have been harassed and bullied in the workplace. The impact is significant. And so I'll share with you a little bit about what some of the common reactions are when people are coming in, what some of the indicators are. And again, these are not prescriptive. It's not a checklist, but over time, having looked at these files, you do see some similarities. Speak to you briefly about, oftentimes people say, why didn't I do anything? Or their partner or spouse will say, why didn't you do anything? Or somebody in their family, why didn't you stand up to this person? Well, there are good reasons, and talk to them. And then finally, talk a little bit about what we do in our role in EAP. So common reactions, not surprisingly, people coming in, and these are people who have actually taken the step to come in. So you can imagine the dozens, for every one person coming in, dozens do not come in, don't know where to turn to. What's even sadder is when they've actually had an EAP program in place and didn't even realize it. But we'll see shock and disbelief, particularly if they're coming in an early stage. They can't believe this is happening to them. And they may have been in work environments where They had good colleagues, a good boss, good days, bad days, but they never thought that they would feel like they're feeling now. So there's some shock and there's disbelief. When people come in, they're at different stages of reaction. Sometimes people come in, maybe it's been several months, if not years, and then you see people who feel utterly powerless. They feel they have no control. They are feeling they're empty shells. They have loss of dignity and respect. And these are some of the words they use, some of the things that we can see just by virtue of working with them. Certainly you're seeing stages of what we would consider depression. That's a fairly common outcome. And we'll see anger. And people will say, well, why would you see anger? I mean, people who react angrily tend to, you would think, be people who stand up to bullies or stand up to people who are victimizing them. But, I mean, the situation with OC Transpo is a classic case of a man whose human rights were violated. You know, simple as that. We can focus on the outcome, obviously, where 4 people were killed, and a lot of focus was on that. But what happened over the course of years was his rights every day of the week were violated for who he was, his speech impediment, his mental issues, and at some point he broke. And I think the best thing coming out of that workplace audit was the very fact that this was a man who had been bullied. So we do see anger. Sometimes we see anger misdirected. They don't know how to work or deal with the person that they're being tormented by, so that they take it out on others. So these are reactions. Again, you get 100 people and you'll have 100 different reactions, but those are some common ones. As far as signs or concerns or symptoms, oftentimes people are very unaware of what they're going through, but perhaps as family members, as colleagues, as friends, we may see these first. And oftentimes that's an ideal time to let people know about programs like ours or any other support programs or supports in place, including, of course, workplace supports. But again, when looking at the number of people who've come in, you'll see, some consistencies. There's avoidance, people feeling terribly alone and isolated, feeling paranoid that somebody is, well, for good reason, because somebody probably is watching them all the time. The irony is that these people do start to make more mistakes. I mean, one of the more common situations of harassment that I've seen over the years is that quiet type where people are just out to look for every mistake you make. We all make mistakes. Every day of the week we make mistakes. But if somebody's watching every move you make and pointing it out to you, or if they happen to be colleagues of yours, pointing it out to your colleagues, or if they happen to report to you, reporting it to their team, then chances are you're going to make more mistakes because you're being watched. And so oftentimes people in our offices, and I've worked with a number as a counselor, will talk about, I was never this way as an employee. This is not who I was. This is not who I am. I'm becoming more forgetful, and that's sad. We see people, obviously, then you see fairly obvious indicators as well. Absenteeism increasing, increase in sick leave, behavioral indicators, more substance abuse and substance use. And again, you can only imagine what some of the symptoms are for people who are not seeking help. So again, these are some that are common, I would say, with people that come into our office. Now, speaking to, I think, a bit of a myth, and it's a myth that I saw especially in the world of working with the victims of violence. Why didn't you do anything, Well, why didn't you just leave him? And it's just not as simple as that. And if only people could understand sometimes the elements that go into why people maintain the kind of relationship they do. For men who are victims of violence, or victims, of harassment or bullying, there's shame. How could this be happening to me? This is not how a man's supposed to act. So it becomes kind of a gender-based position. Oftentimes people don't even know their rights. There are workplace organizations where, this is just boys will be boys environment, speaking to some situations that I was involved in, a decade or so ago. This is how we're supposed to behave. And so people assume this is normal workplace behavior. We were talking over lunch about the situation with the city of Mississauga, and two men who were, it was videotaped, and two men in the city of Mississauga plant, and they were duct taped together in a fetal position. Well, that was standard operating procedure. This is how this manager ran his department. It was, I guess, what we used to refer to as hazing. And the city of Mississauga didn't have a clue what to do with that, and that manager's still actually employed. So it's, there's a real eye-opener. And if anybody's had either been involved in sports associations or being involved in sports, again, you see some of this behavior slowly being removed, but certainly elements of hazing or senior athletes having the right to perpetrate acts on junior athletes is common. You sometimes see that in workplaces too. This is our right. So people will say, well, I didn't do anything because I thought this was just the way of the world. This is how workplaces are supposed to work. I think one of the most common reasons why people don't necessarily act is they're afraid. They're afraid of losing their job. They're afraid of repercussions. If the person who is the perpetrator or the harasser or the bully is your boss, if they're 6'5" and with an awful temper, there are understandable reasons as to why you may be afraid. And those are, easier to get along, go along to get along approach. And so we're working with people who are trying to, deal with the shame and the guilt of allowing this to go on. They don't know where to turn to for help. And I think that's why you have forums like this are ideal, but this is definitely, it's more the norm now, but even 5 years ago, this was not the norm, to have forums like this to discuss this. They feel powerless. I've spoken a little bit about that, but utterly powerless. And when you feel powerless, you feel like you've lost all control. And when you've lost all control, you're, some cases you're prepared to accept any action. And one of the sadder elements to working with people where it's been ongoing for a long time is they feel that they deserved it. And again, that's a very typical reaction to working with women who are victims of domestic violence. They feel, they did something wrong. If they weren't a better employee, if they hadn't responded in a better way, then it might not have occurred. And because all of us we are who we are as a result of all of our experiences accumulated from birth on. And so some of us, may have been, had experiences in childhood where it's easier to accept blame and it's easier to take it all on ourselves. And so that's what oftentimes we're starting with when we work with people, men and women who are coming in where they're, certainly they are dealing with being victimized. So what do we do in the EAP level? There are a number of things we'll do. First and foremost, it's confidential. It's a place where people ideally feel it's safe to have an objective, responsive, empathic individual to listen to. Face-to-face counseling is the key, because isolation is an enemy, and one way of breaking isolation is if you don't feel you can talk to anybody in your family or your friends, you're feeling ashamed, certainly talking to a counselor who really doesn't know you at all is a place to start. And then it's up to us, very importantly, to validate the experiences and what they're going through. Just to see people who have been tormented for years, to have somebody say to them, you know what, this was not your fault, And then, they're literally, some cases they'll break down right there because nobody's ever told them that. So part of that is validation, support, self-care. A lot of times, as I talked about, one of the common reactions is feeling total powerlessness. Then part of our role is to say, okay, what level of control do you have? You can't control this individual's behavior. What can you control? Well, you can control how you take care of yourself. And that may seem so simple when your every day feels like it's torturous, but you know, at the end of the day, you have that element of control that you have to take, how I care for myself. Certainly we talk about, or we focus on the cognitive behavioral approaches and helping people change the messaging around self-blame and self-destruction. At sometimes, depending on, we certainly work with an individual and advise them on how they may be able to seek redress through work. And depending on the workplace, we're often, you know, depending on the work organization, we're more encouraged in some places than others that they're going to accept that. I mean, I have been involved with workplaces where I wouldn't recommend they talk to their boss or anybody in that organization, because there are some workplaces, be it small or large, that have had some fairly destructive culture. But certainly most, and Carleton is no exception, you can guide them through what steps do they need to take. So we're aware of what your policies are. We obviously don't know them intimately, but we're well aware of what they are. And sometimes we'll even say, look, do you want to give me written consent for me to speak to somebody at work on your behalf? And we can do that. It has to be written consent. And we almost switch from a counselor to an advocate. And it's something that we can willingly do. Other times, you know, we're presenting options, and we'll sit with them and talk about, have you considered working elsewhere? You know, have you thought of other opportunities available to you? And we know, I know, that's not that easy. You know, you've got maybe years invested pension, you've got responsibilities, you may be a single parent. But depending on the level of health and risk, it may be one element that we have to consider. And of course, we have career counselors. And again, that's one element where people feel that they're getting control back. You know, I may not be looking, or I may not move, but I got my resume ready. I'm starting to think about how I can take control of my life. We certainly advise, depending on the situation, you know, document. Take the time to write some of this stuff down, because you're clouded emotionally, and sometimes you need to be able to step back and just factually base what it's on. And from time to time, very rarely, if the situation is warranted, we do step in because we feel there's a serious enough risk to self or others that we need to inform the authorities, whether that's the workplace and police. We'll do so. That's rare, but again, we have had to exercise that. We did that this summer, actually. Because if you tell me you're going to probably go back to work and hurt somebody, well, I'm probably going to tell the workplace first, and we let them know that. So those are what we see. So I just wanted to personalize it a bit, because this is real. There are real outcomes. Most of us go to work. Most of us have good days, bad days. We enjoy our work, you know, some days more than others. We get along well with the people, but that's not always the case. I've been in hellish workplaces. We've all had I wouldn't say we've all had, but there are people who have experiences that are hard to fathom, but they're there. The outcomes are real. We just finished investigating at an academic institution elsewhere. Not this place. Don't worry, it's not in this community. It's in another county. It was a school board, and they called 4 days before the end of school year. The principal was about to retire after 15 years, and he wanted us to help him because they'd had an issue of very, very serious harassment that had been lasting all of 15 years, coincidentally. And the end result is we did get involved. The person who was the primary, for lack of a better word, perpetrator, the bully, had moved on, retired. But the damage done to the people that had to deal with it, and how that particular organization let that go, it blew me away, because these people had been living in isolation. You know, some had come in to see us for counseling individually, and certainly one individual's marriage that had ended was a direct result of the experiences that she had gone through as she started to mask some of the pain and the hurt through drinking more than she should have. an absolutely direct result of what had happened at the workplace. So workplaces, I think, that are taking the steps that are being taken, that have been taken here over the last while are incredibly meaningful. So that's a little bit about where we're at. We're, you know, as I said, we're always available, and that's important for you to know, whether it's for yourself, a colleague, that we're there. You know, you can see somebody within 24 hours. That's how quickly you can get support.